Don't you love how sometimes there are experiences that you have in life where you are made aware of some character flaw or some defect in your own spiritual life that God then uses as a way to communicate his strength? Well, that's exactly how the Pocket Prayer Devotional came to be. I was feeling convicted about the shallowness of my own personal prayer life. In fact, sometimes God is a bit irreverent with me. He said, Pete, you really suck at this. And so I felt convicted and I knew something needed to change. Well, around that same time, I was also working on developing my website at a new level. I had had one for a while, but I really wanted to, in this new season, develop it at a greater way. And so I talked to my daughter, who happened to be very much into the whole social media and internet scene. And I said, would you be willing to work with me on updating my website? And she said, Dad, I love you. I think that's a really important thing to do, but I'm not your gal. But I know somebody who is. And so she introduced me to a friend of hers, Doreen. We call her D for short. And she was a brand strategist. And so she set up a phone call for the three of us to chat. And in the phone call, she described a little bit about my life, and Dee was silently listening on the other end. And when the conversation kind of came to a conclusion, Dee said, well, let me understand what it is you're asking me, Mallory. You're asking me, a Black Swedish liberal, to do the brand strategy for a white 65-year-old pastor from Texas. Tell me how that's going to work. And the response I gave to her was, well, I think you'll call me on my bullshit. And that's what I need. I think she loved that answer. And so she immediately signed me up as the person she would help with her strategy, or with my strategy for the website. Along the way, we were talking about spiritual things. She had had some background in the church. She grew up Catholic, but had not really identified much with that faith journey in the latter seasons of her life. And so when we started talking about spiritual things, she became quite curious. She appreciated my realness, my rawness, and my willingness to talk candidly about my own doubts and my own failures. And she had never had an experience like that with somebody who was spiritually oriented, let alone a pastor. And so along the way, she started asking more and more questions about Jesus and Christianity. And then kind of out of the blue, there was a Sunday where she decided she wanted to go visit a church. At this particular church service, they had a time at the end of the service where they made an invitation available for people to receive Christ. She was the only person who went forward that day, but she received the Lord. As you can imagine, I was absolutely ecstatic at that testimony. She went on to say, hey, Pete, I need some help with prayer. I'm not really sure how to do it. Would you mind helping me? Now, bear in mind that this was also at a time where I was feeling convicted about the shallowness of my own personal prayer. And I thought it was such a great signal of God's sense of humor that he would invite me, a person who sucks at prayer, to help this new believer in prayer. And so I started that day with a very simple prayer formula. I would start with a small verse from the Bible and share a few reflections on it, and that would lead to a one-sentence prayer that she could use, and in fact, that I could also use as a prayer we could put in our spiritual pocket for the day. In fact, after sending a couple of them, she said, oh, I love this. This could be my pocket prayer. And that's where the name came from. As it turned out, she said, would you mind doing this for me every day? Well, that was quite the assignment. And yet I felt a prompting that this would not only be beneficial for her, but it would also be important for me. And so that started the journey of our sharing together a daily prayer that she began to use as a promoter and prompter for her own spiritual strengthening. As it went along, she started asking if she could share that with others. And so, yeah, I thought that would be great. And then some of those people said, can you send this to me one-on-one in the morning yourself? Well, long story short, that became something that I did for 2 years. I would send out approximately 200 pocket prayers, and people would say that they appreciated it, but I always thought it was more for me than for them. It was bonus that it also served as a meaningful inspiration for them. Somewhere along the way, then, someone suggested, hey, why don't you turn this into a daily devotional that people can use and give out to others through the means of a book? And I thought that was a good idea, and I already had them in the notes section of my phone, and so sent them to a printer, and the next thing you know, we have a devotional. One of the things that I've learned from this whole journey was that God loves taking our weakness, taking the things that we're not really great at, and using it as an opportunity to reveal His strength. That's been my story, but I'm also convinced that can be part of your story, that the very thing that you think you suck at, God may use for good. Don't discount it. Don't pretend it could never happen, because that's exactly the way God does what He does.